10, Big 550 KTRS. Joining us. By the way, Alex Reyes out for the year. Tommy John surgery. We'll have more a little bit later on, but that story's coming out of Jupiter, Florida. David Solomon from the sports department's down there following that story. Yesterday, Senator Blunt was on the show making some national news with things he said on the show. Let's see if our next guest can bring it as well as he did. The first time on the show, former Secretary of State who lost to Senator Blunt in that Senate race, Jason Kander. Welcome to Big 550 KTRS.
Good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
So how come this is the first time on your show? Do you not like us? What's going on there? How come you run a whole Senate campaign and never once were you on the show?
I don't know, man. Maybe it's your I actually have no idea. I was not in charge of booking which shows I went on. I was going to try and come up with like a humorous clip to say why, but I'm just happy to be here now.
So, but I think it goes to a larger question, and we were kind of joking about it, but it goes to a larger question, is that elected officials and politicians would much rather spend money buying ads than coming on the show and sitting and talking. And not just Democrats, Republicans too. It's more or less like they want to bypass places to come and sit and talk for a commercial. You agree or disagree?
No, I don't know. I did an awful lot of radio interviews and an awful lot of interviews throughout the campaign and went to every single county. So I'm not sure that that's right. I mean, I'm sorry I missed your show. I'm glad I'm here now.
No, that's all right. I was just sort of curious because it just seems like both sides would much rather sort of avoid an interview where you can sit and chat and talk. But anyway, all right, let's get to it. So let's talk about the election. First of all, tough election. Many people thought you had it. Many people thought you were going to take over Senator Blunt. It was close, but ultimately, in the end, it looks like that there was a Donald Trump movement that you couldn't overcome.
Yeah, I think that's right. But I'm moving forward. It's not. There's a lot of people who are negatively affected by these election results, and I'm not one of them. People who might lose their health insurance because of the decisions that are made on Obamacare. The folks who have been in this country there, for every day that they can remember of their lives, dreamers who are worried about whether or not the president's going to send them to a country that they've never thought was home. There are people who are really facing consequences from these election results, and I'm not one of them. My responsibility is the same as every other American citizen, is to do everything I can for the country. I personally don't think that the president is taking us in the right direction, and I'm working against some of the things that he wants to do that I don't agree with.
But he's doing everything he said he would do in the campaign, and everybody had a chance to go and vote. They voted. The results are what they are. There are consequences to elections. So even though these protesters are upset or whatever else, he's doing exactly what he was elected to do.
Well, 54% of the country voted for somebody not named Donald Trump to be president. And he decided, despite that, usually throughout history, when you look at presidents who had very close margins, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, if you look at, for instance, George W. Bush after the 2000 election, they have worked to try to reach out to the other side at the beginning. And he's not done that. He's acted as though he has some sort of mandate from the people, and that's clearly not the case. The 54% of the folks who voted for somebody else to be president, and he's acting as though he won some sort of mandate. He didn't.
Right.
And that's why you're seeing people show up and protest.
No, certainly understandable, and we could say that every president that has come before Donald Trump was more of a traditional type president. During the whole campaign, he wasn't reaching across party lines. He wasn't saying he was going to bring unity to Washington. He was saying he was going to bring chaos, and I'm going to be the candidate. You don't know where I'm coming from. So that's what people wanted. They don't want unity. They don't want reaching across the aisle.
He said those things, and the majority of Americans voted for somebody else to be president.
Well, but but again, the way the rules are set up, everybody would have ran a different campaign if it was a popular vote as opposed to an electoral college vote.
I don't really think that this is the most productive debate in the world. I mean, I'm in the 54% of people who don't like what he's doing, or at least who voted for somebody other than him for president. The day after this president was inaugurated, you saw the largest demonstration on a single day in the history of the world. So clearly, the idea that he has some sort of popular mandate to do what he's doing, I think, is not exactly right. And that's why, when you look at, for instance, the fact that he's, telling one of the biggest lies that an American president has ever told, the idea that 3 to 5 million illegal voters voted in the election. And I think that's about trying to pass voter suppression laws across the country so that it's easier for him to get reelected. And that's what I'm dedicating my time to fighting against.
Jason Kander, you have announced a group of people who are coming together to talk about voting rights and all that. Tell us about the group.
Sure. So it's Let America Vote. It is an organization that we have formed to, for the first time, actually try to win the public debate over voting rights and these voter suppression laws. So up until now, when state legislatures and others have passed laws that make it harder to vote, the way that Democrats, honestly, have pushed back against it, usually successfully, but not in every case, but mostly successfully, has been in court and relying on the fact that most judges find these to be not constitutional. But now you have Jeff Sessions in charge of the Department of Justice, and you have Donald Trump picking the judges, and it becomes very apparent that those of us who favor voting rights need to actually start waging and winning the public debate on this issue, which, honestly, we've not really done in the past. And so that's what Let America Vote was formed to do. I'm the president of it. There's an advisory board that consists of everybody from Josh Earnest, the former White House spokesman, to Martin Luther King III. So it's a pretty confidence-inspiring crew of people, and we're really excited about the reaction that we've had nationally since we launched a week ago.
In the state of Missouri, this past election, the overwhelming majority of voters wanted the voter ID law that was passed by the legislature down in Jefferson City.
And as I said to the legislature, that doesn't mean that the majority of voters wanted to see people disenfranchised. What we're talking about are laws like, I objected to the law that was passed in Missouri, but really what for instance, in one of my last days in office, what I talked to the legislature about was if they are considering going in the direction of North Carolina or Wisconsin, which have made it so that, that it's required to get a very specific, certain kind of identification that people, a lot of people don't need in the other parts of their lives, and so therefore they don't have, only for voting. That has a drastic effect on driving down turnout. And let's be honest, they're not doing this because they're worried about voter fraud. They're doing it because the problem they want to solve is that the people who are less likely to have IDs and less likely to be able to vote tend not to vote Republican. And if they can't vote, well, problem solved. And I just think whether it's the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, keeping people from voting because of who they're likely to vote for is really not what this country's about.
Certainly understandable. But in Missouri, you were against the law, which you have every right to be against the law, but the people overwhelmingly wanted the law. Do you see, is this group going to fight this Missouri law that was just passed?
Let America Vote is going to go anywhere in the country that we need to go. And now suddenly there are a lot of places. This is popping up all over the place because it's a big part of the Republican strategy. So that will very possibly include Missouri if they try and do more than they've done. But if they go back on their word and try and make the law even more restrictive. But we're going to be all over the place because it's just wrong to deny people to vote. I mean, you mentioned that the law passed. As I said, people voted to allow a requirement of some form of photo identification in the Constitution. That doesn't mean that people were voting to keep people from being allowed to vote who've legally been allowed to vote for a long time. And it's important to remember that the other side of this argument has never really been made, and now it is going to be made, and I think that's going to make a difference.
Do you think these laws, as you call them, voter suppression laws or voter ID laws, do you think that's the reason Donald Trump won this election?
There are a lot of reasons why Donald Trump won the election. So I'm not going to go and say that this is the reason. I mean, if I'm not a pundit, so I'm the wrong guy to ask about the 500 different reasons that Donald Trump won instead of Hillary Clinton. But I will say that certainly they're a factor when you consider that Wisconsin is one of the states that decided that it was by a small amount of votes. But I'm not going to sit here and say if it weren't for these that it would have gone differently. But what I will tell you is that I believe there is a very clear strategy being run out of the White House to pass more voter suppression laws all across the country so that in 2 years it's easier for Republicans to hold Congress, and in 4 years it's easier for Donald Trump to retain the White House. And I don't, look, I know a lot of people say that the reason that Donald Trump has made up the idea, because that's what it is. It's just a lie that he made up, that 3 to 5 million illegal voters cast ballots in this election. People say it's because his insecurities, and that is allows him to be able to say, well, he really would have won the popular vote. That may be right. But the other part of it that people aren't talking about is that if he can get that out into people's consciousness and he can make people doubt, their confidence in American democracy, it's a lot easier for Republicans to pass these laws across the country. So this is really about the Trump reelection campaign.
Jason Kander with us for a couple of more minutes. As a military man, what are your thoughts as you sit and watch the National Security Advisor step down after lying about conversations with Russian intelligence about sanctions and everything else that's going on? What are your thoughts as you watch what's going on in Washington?
There needs to be a thorough and exhaustive, just all the way, and I believe as public as can be possible, investigation into this. Because here's an undisputed fact, and that is this, is that based on when the president was told that General Flynn is vulnerable to blackmail by the Russians, there's weeks of time that the president allowed an individual to have complete and total access to American intelligence, knowing that that individual was vulnerable to blackmail by the Russians. This guy was at the top of the pyramid, could see anything he wanted, and the president knew that he was vulnerable to blackmail. I think there's a real simple rule here, is that Congress, when it comes to national security, or, ideally anything else, but certainly when it comes to national security, just don't let the party of who controls the White House dictate anything. How would this Congress have reacted if this sort of thing had happened with President Hillary Clinton? I think that they would have been all over this. I think that everything would have shut down for hearings. It'd be nonstop, and rightfully so. And I think that's what should happen here.
But the other side, I don't know if Democrats would have been so fast to investigate Hillary Clinton during Benghazi or to find out what actually went wrong with Benghazi if they were running the show when that happened.
Well, we don't really know, and we know that she was thoroughly investigated. So if we're just going to apply the exact same standard, then let's apply the exact same standard. The security of our country and the importance of it doesn't change depending on which party is in the White House. And I think that everybody across the political spectrum should agree with that.
Jason Kander with us. What are you hearing from your military friends? Some generals have spoken out and basically saying we need to get it together because we're at war. What are you hearing from some of your military friends?
People are really concerned. They're really concerned, particularly, as you mentioned, I'm a former Army intelligence officer. I still have a lot of friends who are in the intelligence community. And, we casually talk about what's going on. And particularly during the period where he was the president-elect and he was running essentially a misinformation campaign against the American intelligence community, which really, if you look at his Twitter feed so far this morning, he's still doing. I mean, rather than take any responsibility for what's come out, he's just saying the real story is about the fact that people leaked it. Well, people don't have a lot of admiration for somebody who is trying to politicize the American intelligence community. The military, particularly the intelligence community, which I think a lot of people are forgetting, the intelligence community is not a bunch of folks who wear ties and testify before Congress. The vast majority of the intelligence community wears a uniform to work every day. They're in the military. These folks aren't thinking about what party somebody is. They don't care about the politics of it. When I was overseas in Afghanistan, we weren't talking about that stuff. We were just trying to do the job. And people don't appreciate that he's pretending otherwise to try and undermine their credibility.
Certainly, but intelligence leaks is bad all the way around. You don't want a country that is leaking classified information to embarrass either Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump. You would agree that these leaks are illegal and they're bad for a democracy overall.
It's clear that some of the leaks are illegal, some of them are not. But I think that before we can address that, we have to – look, Donald Trump just spent an entire campaign saying that WikiLeaks is the greatest thing ever, which I totally disagree with, and so did every Republican before it started coming after Hillary Clinton. And, yeah, look, those things would need to be addressed. But there's also something else to consider, which is that as a military officer, if you are given an order, and I'm not saying that this happened in this case, but it's one of the things to consider. If you're given an order that's illegal – then you have a responsibility not to obey the order. We need to know everything possible about what's going on. I don't know that that's the situation here. Hopefully it's not. But we have to know why people are leaking, and we have to get into the information. And that's why it's so important that there be an open and transparent and full investigation into the situation.
What is your relationship like with Governor Greitens?
We knew each other before he got into politics. I was, as fellow veterans, we were introduced by mutual friends, and I was a supporter of Mission Continues, and I think still am. And I'd have to look; I can't remember. But obviously, he and I disagree on a lot of stuff. But
right. Well, I mean,
somebody I respect.
He was a Democrat before he was a Republican, so I was just sort of curious because you're both.
To be honest, we never really talked about politics. We talked about veterans issues and that kind of thing. And we didn't know each other that well. We had lunch a couple of times. Have
you talked to him since he's won the governor's race?
Yeah, we've had one or two conversations, just casual conversations, nothing substantive.
Jason Kander, this voting organization you're doing now, but any chance we're going to see you on a ballot anytime in the near future?
I really think what I'm doing right now is important, and it's important enough to deserve my entire focus. And I have no idea whether or not I'll do that again. What I've always said is that I've never run for office for the purpose of running for office. I've always known what the change I wanted to make in the world is, and there have been times where there was an office between me and that change, and that's when I've run for office. And so I'm all about doing something, not about being something. And if at some point that's the case again, then I would run for office again. But I can't sit here and tell you that there's some specific office.
Well, now you've been on my show as many times as you've been on Bill Maher's show. Let's not wait for you to get on Bill Maher's show before you come on this show again.
Okay, deal.
Jason Kander, have a good day. Thanks for checking in.
You bet, man. Thank you.
Jason Kander, former Missouri Secretary of State, was on with Bill Maher last week on Real Time and joined us for the first time here. 926, Big 550, KTRS. Let's talk about St.